Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Jill de Villiers. If you've ever had to do a presentation in front of an audience of any size, whether it is 10 or 1,000, you would know that it can be a very daunting prospect. Do you have what it takes to grab their attention, to keep it for the duration of your presentation, and to leave a lasting impression? If you have any doubts, today's book is for you. The author is Richard Mulholland, an entrepreneur and renowned global speaker. The book is Boredom Slayer, a speaker's guide to presenting like a pro. Richard, thanks so much for coming in and chatting to us.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
Tell me, first of all, why did you decide to start teaching people how to do proper presentations?
So I didn't strictly start with that. I was a roadie. I toured with rock bands, and I was working in the conference space. And I realized that it didn't matter how great the lighting, sound, and AV was. If the presenter was bad, the conference was bad. So I thought I was solving the wrong problem. So I originally set out trying to create better presentations. We have two presentation businesses. Our Core One Missing Link creates presentations for people. And for years we were just developing the content. So we would give some advice, but it was only later that I realized that I was only solving part of the problem. We do believe that you write and create a good presentation long before you deliver it. So the delivery was secondary for us, but later on we realized that we had to take on that aspect too. We wanted to be able to polish the speaker, not just the speech.
Mm-hmm. You say in your book that you think as a speaker you are in front of the audience for, say, an hour, and that is the time invested. But you need to consider the time invested by your audience. So
Absolutely. You know, if I'm speaking, I was lucky enough to speak at an event the other day, and it was, or last year, it was 5,000 people. Now, 5,000 people, and I'm speaking for, I think it was like half an hour. So this is now 2,500 hours of attention have been paid to me. You know, act accordingly. The idea that you would walk up and prepare for this at the last minute is inconceivable to me. You're being paid with a very, very valuable resource, and that's people's time. And you should always make sure that you respect that. And if you start thinking about the amount of time being paid to you when you're delivering a presentation, not, oh, I'm delivering a talk for an hour. I'm delivering a talk to 100 people. It'll take an hour, therefore it's 100 hours of attention being paid. Well, maybe that would make you take it a little bit more seriously.
So where do you have to start your preparation?
Well, you know, it's quite funny when we're working with people and they'll come to us and we'll often say to them, you know, do you need some presentation coaching? And they'll say, no, I'm a great speaker. And I say, well, I didn't ask you that. You know, it's not about whether you're a great speaker, it's about whether you're great at writing a presentation. And I always believe the same thing. You know, if you imagine like a James Earl Jones reading a book to your kids, you know, it would be amazing. Fee, fi, fo, fum, you know, I smell the blood of an Englishman. You'd get this amazing experience. Your kids would be like blown away, like, wow, that's crazy. But as an average parent, if you're reading that same Jack and the Beanstalk to your kids, you know, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, your kids are still amazed. So the speaking is kind of secondary because the story is great. The narrative structure is perfect. But if you're, you know, brought in James Earl Jones and asked them to read, you know, the facts and figures about cryptocurrency, they're going to be bored. And that's the key. You need to start with what you're saying and how you're saying it. Now, when I say you're writing a good presentation, I don't mean you have to write out a script. I mean you have to write a structure for your story that is logical and compelling for your audience. Remember, it's not about what you're saying to them. It's about what they're going to do when they leave the room because you spoke to them. That's what matters.
So if you give them too much information, it's just going to go out in one ear and out the other.
For sure, we have what's called a channel capacity. So there's only so much information that we can hold and process in our brain. And once you give them too much information, it kind of goes through what's referred to as cognitive dumping. So people just lose information. You have to be very, 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 you know, you've designed a great presentation, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. You have to be very intentional and brutally honest about why am I including this? And it comes down very, very simply to the idea that when my audience leaves, I need them to do X. And when you're creating your presentation, it's like more like a sculpture than a painting. You know, a painting, you start with a blank canvas and you add paintings to it. When you're starting a presentation, you kind of throw everything in there. And then you define what X is. What do I want my audience to do? So what does this presentation need to achieve? And then you remove everything that doesn't do that. Everything. And even if you're like, oh, I really, really love that story. Does it help me get my point across? No, because then if it's a great story and it doesn't work towards your message, it will be a distraction, not an aid.
You tell a story in your book about this company that hired you to do a presentation for them, and I think you did 15 slides for them, and then they came back with information to fill those 15 slides, but enough for many more, maybe 80 slides or something. How do you then cut down on that information?
So there's a common myth that, you know, people will say, well, you know, how many slides should I do? And I'll often say something like, you know, if I look at it, if I'm doing a 45-minute keynote, I might say, okay, well, that's a roughly 45-minute slides. I work on a basic slide per minute, but I also work on a 1 point per slide rule. And people take the slide per minute rule, but they forget the 1 point per slide. And that means not that it has to be just maybe one line of text. There could be maybe sometimes a small list building, definitely not too much information. But the idea for me is that every bit of visual content that I present should be trying to help my audience remember just one thing, one key fact. What people will do is they'll say, oh, well, we're just making 15 slides. So then they'll put an essay on each one of those slides. Now, of course, then you're no longer delivering a presentation, then you're delivering a competition. You're competing against your own visuals. And actually, your visuals win because people's attention is lazy, and they will find it much easier just to read through the content you've written than to listen to you. And this is why also people get bored, because you're saying one thing, they're saying something else, they're not sure what the link is, this feels like too much work, I don't care anyway, I'm going to check my phone. And that's what happens.
So you blow quite a number of myths out of this, out of your book, and one of them is the death by PowerPoint. So you say it's not PowerPoint that's at fault; it's the PowerPoint user that is at fault.
Absolutely, blaming PowerPoint for a bad presentation is like blaming a pan for the bad meal. PowerPoint's done nothing wrong; you're just using it incorrectly. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner you'll be able to unleash the amazing power of PowerPoint. It's an extremely powerful tool for helping create memories in your audience's mind. In fact, I would go ahead and say that it is the single best tool that you should be using when it comes to developing presentation slides. And we use all of them. We'll use Prezi and Keynote and everything. But there's many, many reasons you should be using PowerPoint. And if your PowerPoint presentations are not good, then fix the way you make them, not the tool that you use. You know, if you're not good at driving a car, that's not saying, well, cars are bad, let me get on a motorcycle. That's saying learn to drive.
So it's also not necessary to use a presentation, to use slides. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell that you say never uses any slides. He works off a script.
For sure, but you know, you're not Malcolm Gladwell. So for the most part, Malcolm Gladwell is an amazing, he's an artist. He's my favorite speaker to watch. But actually there's a few things that I'll say to people, like people always be blown away. Oh, I absolutely love Malcolm Gladwell. It was amazing. But then we finish the talk and I say, well, what are you going to do differently? Well, I'm not sure. And what bit do you remember? What were the key takeaways? Oh, I just loved how he was delivering the story. You know, Gladwell is great, but he doesn't change as much as you think you would when you're watching a talk because it's harder to process because you're just enjoying the story. And people need something to hook their attention on. And when something changes, you know, in a space, people will look at it. And that change is what keeps your audience's attention there. For the vast majority of us who are not as good as Gladwell, Gladwell can change his voice and get your attention back, and then he'll lull you so you're leaning forward, and then he'll change his voice again. But most of us aren't comfortable enough to do that. So when I'm finishing a point, I might lead into a next big change, and a slide will change. And that slide change enough is enough for an audience to look up and to see what's happening. And then I've captured it again, captured them again, and I just got to hold their attention. Because I understand as a speaker that my audience's attention is a diminishing resource, and it's constantly diminishing until I catch it again, and then it's back up again.
So how do you see, how do you know that it's going, or do you just sort of anticipate it?
First of all, you're aware that it's hard. Paying attention is difficult. We all know this. We're always competing for many, many things, and it's getting harder and harder and harder. So I work under the assumption that I've got your attention for a few seconds, and if I'm not saying something interesting enough, I'm going to lose your attention. And so I have to keep on making sure that I capture you again. You know, you could be staring at me. You can see audiences looking at you. My wife always refers to it as submarine mode, when you're just kind of staring into space. The analogy I use for people is like, it's like one of those old typewriters, and your audience is the paper. And you're typing away, and you look up, and you see the paper still there, and you're like, oh, well, everything's working. Just keep on going, keep on going. But actually, your audience is there, the paper is there, they're staring at you, but they're not paying attention. And every now and then, you got to take that carriage and go, and, you know, get their attention again. And then you can carry on writing. because then they're paying attention. It's not enough that they're present, they need to be attentive. And that's your job.
Oh. Now, in your book, you give lots of examples. My son was watching me read the book, and he was saying to me eventually, at one point, he said, "Mommy, are you reading that book or are you watching YouTube?" So I said to him, well, it's because of the examples in the book. So you say, watch so-and-so. Then I stop the book and I go and watch how so-and-so does it.
So glad you did it.
So it's a very nice interactive experience to read the book. Is that why you planned it like that?
For sure, and it's also because that's how I learn things. We always say that our teams have a double whammy, both at Missing Link and Talk Drawer, is that we attend a lot of events. So we actually think our skill comes from not the presentations we've worked on, but the ones we've observed. And we constantly get to see both what the presenter is saying, which is interesting, but also how they've delivered it. And I really do believe that it's a craft that you can master by observing and saying, well, I really like how they did that. Or more importantly, we always say to people, next time you watch a TED Talk, watch it with a pen and paper and just sit down and say, did they buy my attention at the beginning? Do I care about this? Am I personally invested? Yes, no. What do I think about the way they're presenting? What do I like about their visuals? What could improve? And then take a critical eye, as if the TED speaker said, would you coach me? Would you mind watching this talk and telling me what you would improve? What did you like, what you didn't like? You're still getting the value of the talk itself, but now you're getting a double whammy because you're getting to be intentional about your feedback. And the single thing that made me a better speaker, a better public speaker, is becoming a public speaker coach. Because as I was looking at things that people would do, and I think, oh, I've got to fix this for them. I would fix it for them, and then the next week I'd be on the stage, and I'd think, I've got to try that myself. And then I would do that, and it would work better. So I really, really do want my audience at the book, the reader, to get engaged with public speaking. It should be something we all love. This idea that public speaking should be something you hate is absolutely ridiculous. We may be afraid about getting onto a roller coaster, but we go because we love it. You may have nerves when you stand up to speak. That's good. That means you care. The job is not to avoid butterflies, it's to get them to fly in formation. So we want people to have nerves, but we want them to love the act. And I want the book to show that people do.
Thank you so much for coming in and chatting to us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks. So my guest is Richard Mulholland, and the book is Boredom Slayer, A Speaker's Guide to Presenting Like a Pro. And that was it for this edition of Talking Books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.